In the land of Tamriel, there is a form of dark magic known as necromancy, a type of magic that involves the raising of corpses and the manipulation of souls. While necromancy is vilified by many races and cultures, there are always those that gravitate towards its use, either for knowledge, power, or more, depraved pursuits. Factions of necromancers also exist, be it the vile worm cult to the incredibly sexy Telvanni. But while there are quite a few necromancers that have left their mark on Tamriel, who are the best? Individuals who stand out among the rest, and who is definitively the greatest necromancer in all of Tamriel? Hello my fellow hirelings of House Telvanni! I'm Neloth, and today I want to discuss who I think are the best necromancers in all of Tamriel, and afterwards discuss who I think is definitively the greatest of all of the necromancers. Before beginning, I do want to say, as always, that player protagonists will not be counting, because I don't really care to have some OC dick measuring contest. And also, individuals or groups that are seen as powerful wizards rather than necromancers, like the sexy Telvanni, will not be counting either, unfortunately. And I would like to thank my channel members Mirak, Sovdark, Connor Runda, Nork, Will Ernst, Ranger McKay, Milani Stilla, The Proud Prince, Deadpool Maoista, Dilo, and Boris Basinski. And if you would like to see my videos earlier by either 24 hours or even 3 days, then consider becoming a member. All members get early access, and Oathman and Mouths will get shoutouts at the beginning or end of almost every video. So with all that being said, let us raise up some candidates and see who the greatest necromancer in Tamriel truly is. Durnehviir. Durnehviir is quite unique among most of the necromancers in this video because he is a dragon that resides in the Soul Cairn, a realm of oblivion controlled by entities known as the Ideal Masters. Because Durnehviir is a dragon, he is immortal and has existed since the Malefic era and was most likely a part of the dragon cult. Durnehviir took part in many battles for control and dominance, but unlike the other dragons, Durnehviir sought other means of power and delved into the forbidden arts of necromancy, or Alok Dilon as it's known in the dragon's tongue. Durnehviir made contact with the Ideal Masters, and in return for the power to summon armies of undead, he was to guard a woman named Valerica who had been trapped in the Soul Cairn. Unfortunately, the Ideal Masters neglected to mention that Valerica was a vampire, and thus immortal, meaning he was tricked into becoming an eternal guardian of the Soul Cairn. After enough time had gone by, Durnehviir's soul had become bound to the Soul Cairn, meaning it was impossible for him to leave. This also meant that if he was slain, he would simply just rematerialize after a certain amount of time. Dragons can't technically be raised from the dead unless they are a bone husk, so Durnehviir is the closest we will ever get to an undead dragon. While Durnehviir is an extremely powerful necromancer, being able to summon hordes of undead and knowing the shout, soul tear, and being a literal dragon, he is basically a slave. Forced to serve and remain in the Soul Cairn for all eternity, and only being able to go to Tamriel at the last Dragonborn's command, and only for a few moments. Meaning he cannot be the greatest necromancer. It's like calling the sword Goldbrand the greatest swordsman. Potema. Potema, the Wolf Queen of Solitude, was the daughter of Pelagius Septim II and granddaughter of Emperor Uriel Septim II. Now, Potema had a rough childhood, mostly because at the age of 14, she was married off to King Mantiarco of Solitude, a fat Nord who was 63 years old. Ugh. And while this marriage was fucked up, Mantiarco did have a great fondness for Potema, who allowed her to wield near total control in matters of court. This led to Potema having great ambitions and a lust not for the throne of solitude, but the ruby throne of the Septim Empire. After a series of miscarriages, Potema was able to birth a son whom she named Uriel Septim III after her grandfather Uriel Septim II, fueling her ambitions further. Oh, and King Mantiarco died 3 years after. Now, I won't talk too much about her backstory because it is extremely long, but Potema began a civil war called the War of the Red Diamond that pitted Potema and her son against her younger brothers Sepphoris Septim and Magnus Septim. The War of the Red Diamond technically ended when Potema's son was captured and burned alive by a mob just before his trial. However, the city of Solitude, which Potema ruled at this time, had been under siege for 10 years after the war. The reason why this siege took so incredibly long is because Potema had delved more and more into necromancy and Daedric summoning rituals, and then used them to cause as much damage to the Empire as possible, mounting attack after attack. Potema employed necromancers to raise any fallen soldiers and bind them to her service. Solitude was said to have become a land of death, and even Potema's generals and chambermaids were of the undead. Potema did finally die at the age of 90 during the siege, although how she died specifically is unknown. But there are rumors that she might have become a Daedra and inspired mortals to mad ambition and treason, similar to Emperor Pelagius the Mad. Because books say that Potema employed necromancers, we don't really know the extent of her own necromantic powers. But considering she is known as the most dangerous necromancer and that her spirit was sought after by a group of necromancers in the 4th era, I believe this does attribute to her power. Not only that, but even after the necromancers of the 4th era failed to summon Potema's soul, she was still able to manifest her undead spirit in Tamriel and recruit vampires and raise undead once again until she was stopped by the player character. Potema is described as unambiguously evil and is infamous among necromancers. However, I feel that her failures make her not the greatest necromancer, but still powerful and quite mad. Nagasta. Nagasta is a slowed necromancer that serves both Mannimarco, the King of Worms, and also Clavicus Vile, Daedric Prince of Wishes. He is most known for capturing the soul of Izara, the sister of Cyrus the Red Guard, and being defeated by Cyrus. During the events of The Elder Scrolls Red Guard, Nagasta resided on Stros Makai. However, it is rumored that before he lived in a wizard's tower in Vardenfell, likely the same tower that another necromancer named Sorkvild the Raven lives in during the game of Morrowind. Nagasta was not only a necromancer but a slowed, a title and race despised in most of Tamriel, but he was allowed to occupy Stros Makai by the High King of Hammerfell Thasad II, Provisional Governor Rikton, and Mannimarco. This means, unlike many necromancers to exist, especially in Skyrim, Nagasta was one with friends in many high places. Although in the case of Thasad and Provisional Governor Rikton, it was more likely out of fear than any mutual respect. While residing in Stros Makai, Nagasta set up a soul snare that enveloped the entire island. This soul snare captured the souls of those who were not protected by holy rituals or who were buried in unhallowed grounds. So if you were a sailor that died at sea and washed up on the shores of Stros Makai, you were probably fucked. But why is Nagasta so great? Well, there isn't a whole lot of information on his accomplishments, but his legend is known far and wide. A book that Nagasta wrote called Nagasta Kavada Kavakis is a highly sought-after book by necromancers like Sorkvild the Raven, who I mentioned previously, and the book is also used in worship by an isolated town called Hackdirt. Although in Hackdirt, the book is called the Bible of the Deep Ones and is encoded in the Daedric language, but translated the contents are similar to Nagasta's book. Additionally, Slodes do live a long time, so it can be theorized that Nagasta was around for literal centuries, and was perhaps around when the Slodes released the Thracian Plague in the First Era that killed half of Tamriel's population. This long lifespan means that Nagasta had time to perfect his necromantic craft and also forge relationships with Clavicus Vile and Mannimarco, likely learning a great deal of necromancy from them. Since Slodes are extremely renowned for their necromancy, it made sense to put him on this list. However, nothing could prevent Nagasta from the demise of Cyrus the Restless. Relmyna Verenum. Relmyna Verenum is a Dunmer necromancer that lives in the Shivering Isles, the Daedric realm of Sheogorath. She was once a member of the Mages Guild, but due to her experiments on necromancy and pain, and her discovery of a sixth element, the element of flesh, Relmyna was expelled from the Mages Guild, but her discoveries and power of necromancy and flesh magic got the attention of Sheogorath, who invited Relmyna to his realm. During her time in the Shivering Isles, Relmyna created the first ever Gatekeeper, a massive flesh atronach that was seemingly invincible, impervious to both blade and spell. The Gatekeeper only ever had one weakness, the tears of its own creator, Relmyna. The Champion of Cyrodiil exploited this weakness by coating their blade in Relmyna's tears, which is fucking wild when you say that out loud, and destroyed the Gatekeeper. Sometime after, Relmyna built a second Gatekeeper with the help of the Champion of Cyrodiil that successfully held back the armies of Jiggalag during the Grey March, although whether this Gatekeeper had the weakness of the original is unknown. Relmyna also conducted many experiments on Daedric creatures like hungers and their appetite for flesh, and replacing a zombie's expired blood with that of a fresh Breton's to see if its fighting prowess would increase. Relmyna is a sadistic necromancer whose power was so great that she caught the attention of a god, which is exceptionally noteworthy. Vastarie. Vastarie, also known as the Witch of Azura, is an Altmer Lich that is seen as one of the few good necromancers. Before becoming a necromancer, she was part of the Sigic Order and was the first person to ever bind spirits using a sigil geode, which is a sort of soul gem that just can't be used in enchanting. She was also the first person to bring black soul gems into Tamriel after opening a portal to Cold Harbor. So while Molag Bal is the father of the Black Soul Gem, Vastarie could be seen as a sort of mother of the Black Soul Gem. Now, when conflict arose between two members of the Sigic Order, Mannimarco and Vanus Galerion, over the study of necromancy, Vastarie and her husband Telekar left the Order to join Mannimarco and his newly founded worm cult. The relationship between Vastarie and Mannimarco would not last, however, as Vastarie wanted to use necromancy and soul magic for ethical purposes like extending life, while Mannimarco did not. Because of this, Vastarie and her husband fled to Valenwood, where they settled down and had a child named Callian. Sadly, Callian died at a very young age, which tarnished the relationship of Vastarie and Telekar, because Telekar prevented his son from moving on to Aetherius by binding him to a flesh atronach. This naturally horrified Vastarie, who saw the flesh atronach as a pale imitation of her son and wanted her child to move on to Aetherius. So she tore Callion's soul from the flesh Atronach and trapped Telekar in an Ayleid ruin so he could think on what he had done. Vastarie then wandered Nirn and sort of found God in Azura, the Daedric Prince of Twilight, and became extremely devoted to her. Vastarie eventually returned to Valenwood and founded a school to train mages in the ethical practices of soul magic. Vastarie tried to reconnect with Vanus Galerian and show him the successful findings her school discovered, but Vanus still found her practices to be quite disgusting. Clearly, Vanus Galerian wouldn't survive a day in a Telvanni tower. Vastarie also helped free a priestess of Azura named Kulanwe, who was being tortured endlessly by Molag Bal, and also helped to defeat a Khajiit Dromathra lich named Aram Kal. Not only is Vastarie a very successful necromancer, but she's also one of the more benevolent ones, which is a rarity in the Elder Scrolls, given how most people use necromancy to vile ends. Not like the Telvanni, though. Before naming the greatest necromancer, I want to give an honorable mention to Kelamaril Lightbringer. Kelamaril Lightbringer, also known as King Kelamaril the Undying or the Sorcerer King, is an Ayleid lich that once ruled Cyrodiil as a king back in the First Era. He was the main antagonist in the mobile game Elder Scrolls Blades, which is probably why you haven't heard of him. Kelamaril wasn't just content with being a king, and so he used his already incredibly powerful necromantic magic to raise an undead army and wage war all across Tamriel. The goals of Kelamaril were actually pretty simplistic for a sadistic necromancer, and was just to simply destroy all of Nirn. Why Kelamaril wanted to destroy all of Nirn is unknown, but before his plans could come to fruition, Kelamaril's brother, Volantis, and many other Ayleid kings led a rebellion to overthrow the Sorcerer King. But because he is so powerful, he could not be killed, likely because he was just that powerful of a lich. So Volantis sealed Kelamaril away using Kelamaril's own crown. But Kelamaril was reawakened when mercenaries of the Bloodfall Queen, Urzoga Gra Batul, accidentally destroyed the statue of Volantis, which was keeping Kelamaril sealed away. A hero known as the Warrior, along with a Khajiit lore master named Sashi, were able to prepare a ritual to reseal Kelamaril. But not before Kelamaril raised a massive undead army once more and attacked Rivercrest, the town that the Warrior and Sashi lived in. However, the Warrior was able to defeat Kelamaril in combat and seal him back up once more. While powerful, there really isn't a lot of information on Kelamaril, which is why he is only an honorable mention. Also, I really just needed a full-on lich in this video to satisfy my quota. And now, it is time for me to name who I believe is definitively the greatest necromancer in all of the Elder Scrolls. You probably know him, you may have even encountered him before. It is none other than Mannimarco, the King of Worms. Mannimarco is considered to be the greatest necromancer in all of the Elder Scrolls. He was originally part of the Psijic Order with his closest friend Vanus Galerian. However, he began to delve into necromancy and began to experiment on his own classmates. This disturbed Vanus, and when he reported Mannimarco to the Right Master Ichesis, Mannimarco was banished from the Order and sent to Tamriel, much to the anger of Vanus Galerian. Because Vanus believed the Psijic Order just unleashed a monster on all of Tamriel, and no one has ever been more right. On Tamriel, Mannimarco created his own necromantic cult called the Order of the Black Worm, and went on to become the first lich ever. Not only that, but if Mannimarco's biography is to be believed, then Mannimarco was also the first necromancer ever. At some point during this time, Mannimarco also became an ally of Molag Bal, Daedric Prince of Domination. However, this alliance was built on lies because Mannimarco had plans to betray Molag Bal and use the Amulet of Kings to steal the soul of the Prince of Domination, literally becoming a Daedric Prince, literally becoming a god. However, before that, Mannimarco gave counsel to the Duke of Coral, Varin Aquilarius, and aided him in deposing the Longhouse Emperors, who were a dynasty of Reachmen that took the Ruby Throne. Mannimarco then convinced Varin to use the Amulet of Kings in a ritual to make Varin a Dragonborn and solidify his claim to the Ruby Throne. But Mannimarco tricked Varin and used the ritual to trigger a cataclysmic event known as the Soul Burst. The Soul Burst was a massive explosion of magical energy that broke the veil between Nirn and Oblivion, meaning the Daedra could easily enter Tamriel in larger numbers than before and invade. Molag Bal was the orchestrator of this event and made plans to trigger another event called the Plane Meld, which would merge Nirn with Molag Bal's Daedric realm of Cold Harbor. However, Mannimarco was defeated by an individual known as the Vestige, and afterwards Molag Bal found out about his treachery to replace him as the Daedric Prince of Domination, which led Molag Bal to take his soul and begin torturing him viciously. But at some point, Mannimarco was able to escape his torture and rebuild his necromantic army and worm cult. This eventually led to a battle between Mannimarco and his old friend turned enemy, Vanis Galarian. This battle appeared to be a victory for the Mages Guild, but Vanis Galarian was killed, and supposedly Mannimarco as well. But this wasn't the end of Mannimarco. Oh no. The King of Worms eventually began searching for the Totem of Tiber Septim, which was an artifact that could control the Numidium, a massive brass god. But Mannimarco was not interested in the Numidium itself, but rather an object that powered it called the Mantella. Mannimarco planned to use the Totem of Tiber Septim to activate the Mantella and use it to achieve apotheosis and become a literal god, similar to his plans with Molag Bal. Now, an event surrounding the Numidium called a Dragon Break happened, where events both did and didn't happen. Watch my previous video if you want to know more. But basically, Mannimarco both did and didn't become a god. A version of him shedded his mortal coil and descended into the heavens with an intense amount of power. However, another version failed and remained on Nirn. The version of him that remained on Tamriel made plans to destroy the Mages Guild and steal the soul of Archmage Traven. Mannimarco, jealous of himself, I like to think, wanted to acquire more power in the hopes of achieving godhood for a third time. However, Archmage Traven sacrificed his own soul so the champion of Cyrodiil could finally kill Mannimarco, or at least the Mannimarco that remained on Nirn. Dragon breaks can be so confusing. Mannimarco is seen as the first Necromancer, the first Lich, and definitely one of the oldest Necromancers, and raised countless armies of undead, created the largest and most powerful necromantic cult, and held the world in his hands when triggering the Soul Burst. Mannimarco planned to steal Molag Bal's power and become a god, but failed. Yet, he was still able to achieve godhood afterwards by obtaining the Mantella. Even before achieving apotheosis, Mannimarco was already worshipped by many necromancers as the King of Worms. Mannimarco also created many powerful necromantic artifacts like the Bloodworm Helm, the Necromancer's Amulet, and the Staff of Worms. And finally, Mannimarco is one of the few necromancers to actually achieve their goals, except for maybe the ideal masters, but they are a group of people, which is why I did not speak of them in this video. Mannimarco is the boy that became God, and is undoubtedly the greatest necromancer in all of the Elder Scrolls. And that is all I wrote! A video where I talk about some of the best necromancers, and then name who I believe is definitively the greatest necromancer in all of Tamriel. I hope you enjoyed this video. So with all that being said, make sure to like the like button, like the subscribe button, and like the bell notification down below to be updated on future videos. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.